Tonight, I am going to be talking about the third chapter of the book, How to Do Life by Tralek Rinpoche. This third chapter is titled The Importance of Positive Thoughts. He begins by reviewing the previous chapter that I covered already last week. And he says that it's a misconception to think that all self-images are considered wrong or bad or harmful in Buddhist thought, that there are self-images that are important, and many come from ego, and those not pay so much attention to, but be aware of them. On page 27, he says, quote, "It's possible to cultivate a positive self-image that is not egocentric, but rather healthy and sometimes something we need," end quote. So we need the motivation to travel the path, the motivation to want to become bodhisattvas and Buddhas, and this healthy self-image is a requirement for having the necessary motivation to really travel the path. If we don't have that healthy self-image, it's all too easy to fall into the, well, I think trap is a good way to put it, of being arrogant, thinking that you're better than other people, because underneath it, you actually feel that you're inadequate. And you kind of go back and forth thinking that you're inadequate, and then you've got to pump yourself up and feel that you're better than other people. And then you realize that actually you are full of faults, and then you go back to feeling inadequate, and so on and so forth. And it's never ending. Later on in the chapter, he talks about the inherent suffering and stress in samsara and in having an ego and identifying with it. And this is part of the reason why we suffer when we associate ourselves with this egotistical creation. So he says, well, why not just develop a healthy one based on reality rather than a fantasy? Then he goes into this aloneness versus loneliness in more detail. Again, he covered this in the previous chapter. He says that with a strong, healthy sense of self, there is aloneness, but it is devoid of loneliness. There's a sense of self that is not determined by how others look at you, or actually more closely put, how you think others are looking at you. That sentence gives you an idea of how complicated our sense of self can be when we're looking through the eyes of ego. So with a healthy, strong sense of self, it's not determined by others. Here are some opposites. It's not dependent on approval or disapproval, of denigration of yourself by others, or you denigrating other people. It's not based on judgments of others or judgments of yourself, favorable or unfavorable. It is not based on being taken seriously or perhaps laughed at, or people listening to you or people not listening to you, people arguing with you or people agreeing with you, being invited versus not being invited, being left out. All of this is not present with this healthy sense of self. And so this is what is talked about being the difference between loneliness and aloneness. With loneliness, you're going to have all these patterns of opposite that I've just gone over, and you're going to feel separate from other people. And then all kinds of judgments come in, how you think other people are seeing you, what they think of you. And again, it gets very complicated. So what happens is that you join these feeling of being separate with the afflictive states of mind or delusional patterns. What do you get? We get drama. And with aloneness, there's clarity. There's a sense of ease with oneself where you don't need to seek validation or approval from other people. You're at ease with other people. You're at ease with the world. So that is a difference between aloneness and loneliness. Next, he goes into really the heart of the chapter, which is the importance of thoughts, that we communicate with the world with our body, speech, and mind, but thoughts are the most important part. It is thoughts that we use to create who we are, whether it be a healthy sense of self or a samsaric ego. Very simply, quote, everything that we experience because we have thoughts, end quote. How we think, what we think, our habitual patterns, our reasons, our emotional responses, all of these are wrapped up in our thought process, our thinking. He talks about we can feel depressed, we can feel elated. All of this is determined by our thoughts. And as I mentioned earlier, he says that it's not so much what other people are thinking about us or saying about us, but what we think other people are saying about us and thinking about us, and what we think about their actions. The story that I like to relate is you have gone to a dinner party at a friend's house, and among other foods that were served was some spinach. And you enjoyed the meal, had a great time with everybody. You were smiling, laughing, and so forth. And then later on, you go to the bathroom, you look in the mirror, and there stuck between your teeth is some spinach, all green. And it's big and it's very visible. And then you think, oh, all night long, I've been smiling. People have been looking at me. What are they thinking? They must think I'm an idiot. Da, 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 da. And then suddenly your whole view of the evening changes just because of that piece of spinach. This is the difference between having a healthy self-image and one that is based on what you think other people think of you. With a healthy self-image, it would be no big deal. On the other hand, it could be a huge deal in terms of your own mind. You could blow it up way out of proportion and develop all kinds of emotions about this. Our mind is extremely powerful, that this shapes how we look at the world, who we are, who we will become, or who we will not become, and all kinds of other things. It determines our moods, our emotional experiences. It really has so much to do. It colors really our life, our mind. Here is a quote: mind is extremely powerful precisely because it can shape who we become and how we see ourselves and the world. The teachings of the Buddha are that we need to pay attention to our thoughts because they just don't come and go. They leave imprints. Even fleeting thoughts can be very persistent. When we meditate, sometimes we see in a particular session the same thought or the same group of thoughts coming back over and over and over again. And in fact, when we aren't meditating, if we pay attention to our thoughts, we see the same thoughts coming up over and over and over again. And these fleeting thoughts, they leave these traces. And over time, these traces become solidified. It's a bit like the difference between seeing an ant and seeing an ant's nest full of ants. Even insignificant thoughts, when we're having them over and over again, can have a big impact on our mind and hence our lives. So this can influence our dispositions, our moods. We can become a negative type of person if we have enough random negative thoughts or listen to enough random negative music, or maybe not so random, watch the wrong kind of movies, and so on and so forth. It can get very, very negative, in fact, if we don't realize this and leave it unchecked. So to continue then, he talks about self-reliance and saying that self-reliance is very important, that it teaches us that we have to take care of ourselves. We can't let other people do it. We can't give this responsibility to other people. But on the other hand, being self-reliant actually means that we are developing a sense of sympathy and empathy towards others. In taking care of ourselves, our mind becomes clearer and we start seeing other people more clearly, and we start seeing that other people are having just as much difficulty in their lives as we are, and probably having more difficulty in their lives than we are. Being self-reliant means that we realize we don't need others to feed our ego, that we can be there for others rather than others being there for us. It also means that we can change ourselves, that we can purposely work with ourselves and change and become better people, that the power to do this is within us. We're not helpless, we're not hopeless. And in fact, you realize that it's easy to change your own attitude, your own thoughts, than it is to change the world. The common samsaric approach is to blame others for our negative circumstances and experiences and so forth. When that happens, then we become a victim. And victims become more vulnerable to others. They hand their power over to other people. The reason why I'm having a bad time is that somebody else is doing it to me. I can't help it. It's their fault. I have nothing to do with this. They are doing this to me, and it's making me miserable. So you feel as a victim that you're helpless and you're hopeless, unless maybe you can get that person or circumstances to change. But if we can't change our own mind, how in the heck can we expect to be able to have the ability to change another person's mind? When you're going down this path, you never think about it in that term. So here is a quote. We need to consider this and learn to empower ourselves so that when we interact with others, it is more genuine and authentic, end quote. So when we empower ourselves, when we get this more genuine and authentic interaction, it comes about because our fears and our anxieties have settled down just a little bit. We're feeling less affected by the actions of other people, that their drama is their drama. It's not your drama. Because of this, we become more aware of the actions of other people, and we are able to relate to them in a more genuine and authentic manner, that we see things more clearly. So when we have developed this habit of thinking positively instead of negative things and about what could go wrong and what has gone wrong and how miserable I am, we start thinking positively about what we actually have in life and how wonderful things actually are for us. This affects even our posture, our body language. It affects our mood, our attitude. It can pervade our lives in a very good way. Whereas if we have this low self-image, if we have an egotistical self-image, then all kinds of negative things happen to us. We can develop I call it an inner critic, but it is a inner voice that is constantly pointing out how you have failed and how you're really not a very good person and you're not competent, and all kinds of other messages that this inner critic gives you. And that inner critic can get very, very habitual. When you meditate, you start being aware more of these thoughts, and easy at that point to see this inner critic. You could compare it with a soap opera, and frequently it's just repeating itself. It's reruns of a soap opera. It's not even an original soap opera. And what can counter this, of course, is the power of our mind. This negative attitude can be very powerful. On the other hand, if we turn mind into a positive direction, it can be just as powerful. He points out that this power of the mind is not being able to do supernatural activities, reading the minds of other people, and all kinds of other things, predicting the future. That what it is, quote, real mind power is when we can work with the mind to transform ourselves, end quote. That is the power of the mind, that our mind is workable and our mind can transform how we view ourselves, how we view the world. We all want to have a happy, satisfying life, a fulfilling life. And the best way to do this is to use the power of our mind and generate positive thoughts. He even says, as Buddhists, we meditate and that we try to pacify our mind. But even more important than that is having positive thoughts about ourselves and about the world. That meditation and pacifying the mind is not enough. That positive thoughts and positive words are more powerful. So we have to start with ourselves. We have to develop more positive thoughts about ourselves. He mentions Tonglen, which is a practice of taking on the suffering of others and giving them your qualities. It could be your happiness, it could be your health, or whatever that is valuable that might benefit another person. But in talking about that, he says that some people feel deleted through a session of Tonglen, that they feel they've given up much of what they have and they have nothing left to give, and they feel uncomfortable. But if we have positive thoughts about ourselves, we don't need a reserve of positive thoughts or positivity. We just naturally will lean in a positive direction, and these positive thoughts will arise without even trying to cultivate them. It becomes natural, it becomes automatic to have positive thoughts. So we want to, when we are, you might say, talking to ourselves with that inner voice, we want to be saying uplifting things. We want to say kind words to ourselves, that this is very important. And it's very doable and it's very powerful. And if we can do that for ourselves, then we can do it for other people. And that can make a huge difference in their lives. As I was preparing this part of the talk, I was reminded about a experience I had yesterday. I needed to eat lunch. I went to the cities yesterday and I stopped in a restaurant, which I used to go to occasionally before COVID, but I hadn't been in there for over 2 years and I didn't know any of the staff. Not that I knew them before, but I might have at least, if I would have gone in without that 2-year break, might have at least recognized a person or two, but I didn't know any of the staff. I sat down and grabbed a menu that was on the table and started looking at it. And a woman came over and put a glass of water down. And I was so engrossed in the menu that when she put the glass down, I kind of got startled. Well, then I went back to the menu and the woman left and my waitress came up. And this is what really impressed me. I was sitting in a booth by myself. She came up and just slid into the seat on the booth across from the table from me and said hello. I can't remember what else she said. She probably said that she was my waitress. We did a little small talk, and I said, the woman that cleans up the tables brought me this water, and she startled me. And I said that reminded me the time before that I was startled. I was walking out the back door of my house, which is really the front door, but it's in the back of the house, and walking down the deck steps to the lawn. And I look up and here is a FedEx delivery truck driving right at me, just a few feet from me, moving. And I was startled. And then she said that she went out one day and there were a couple of raccoons by her and they startled her and she threw a volleyball at them and ran and screamed. Anyway, I kind of felt like I had gone into somebody's house for a meal rather than gone into a restaurant. She really had a manner about her to feel at ease. The point that I'm getting at here is that we can, through positive thoughts, make ourselves feel at ease with ourselves. And when we do that, we can make ourselves feel at ease with other people. And it shows that when we are at ease with ourselves, that's when real communication happens. We start seeing people more clearly. We start seeing ourselves more clearly. And we use positive words and positive thoughts to present ourselves to other people. Quote, real communication takes place first because one is more self-sufficient, not completely dependent on the assessments or judgments of others. And secondly, because one has been able to realize the power of the mind itself. So there is this interconnection between our moods, our levels of happiness or unhappiness, and our ability to communicate with other people. It's very important to realize this, even if you get just a little glimpse of how important this is and how it works. So we can't isolate our actions from our thoughts. We need to pay more attention to our thoughts, more attention to our thoughts than we would do to our body, whatever it is that we're doing with our body, that our thoughts are really the driver behind everything. The words are close behind, and they really determine what our actions are going to be of body. So we have to pay attention to our thoughts. And by doing so, that's when real transformation starts or arises. A change comes from within. It does not come from changing our circumstances or changing our behavior. It starts with inside, what's going on inside of us, and then it will naturally flow into our actions from there. If we just try to change patterns, I like to compare it with changing channels on a TV from one soap opera to another. If you try to change your circumstances, you haven't changed what is behind your circumstances. If you're not satisfied with what's going on, changing your circumstances will not lead to more satisfaction, at least not for long. You'll find that you are back basically in the same pattern as you were before in the old circumstances. You could go out and do a retreat, in fact, and there you are in your own cabin, meditating and so forth, and you'll find that you take your mind with you, and it's the same mind that you thought you left at home with the same problems. If we are going to change, we have to work at this very deep level of our thoughts and our habitual patterns. But we can change. This is the good news with it. We do not have to rely on other people doing things for us to change. He said something here that really jumped out at me because I have felt very strongly about this. Quote, how we communicate and relate to others, what we listen to and read, and how we choose to spend our time can enable us to take power back and empower ourselves. So in other words, we want to be careful of what we read, what we watch. We want to pay attention to what kind of thoughts we have and let go of the negative thoughts and go out of the way to cultivate positive thoughts. I remember when I was doing this many, many, many years ago, when I first came in contact with Buddhism, I realized that I kept saying, oh, I forgot. I would leave home. Oh, I forgot to take something or another with me. Or I'm doing something and, oh, I forgot to do da 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 da, and so forth. And eventually I realized that that really wasn't an accurate way of looking at things, because at the moment when I said I forgot was actually the moment that I remembered. It might have been nicer to have remembered earlier, but I did remember, and that's what I wanted to do. So instead of going, oh, I forgot, what an idiot I am, da, 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 the inner critic, I would go, oh, I remembered, that's good. I'd like to try to improve and remember more quickly. In other words, kind of give myself a little pat on the back for remembering at all. So this is really important, how we look at these things and how we talk to ourselves and judge ourselves. Eventually, I hung up a sign in my kitchen on the bulletin board that a friend of mine gave me as a joke. He didn't realize that I had this inner critic that kept telling me, oh, you keep forgetting, you're not so smart, you're an idiot, da, 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 da. Among other subjects, there were a lot of other subjects that inner critic liked to visit, but the sign that he gave me said, the beatings will continue until morale improves, and then in little letters, the management. That is ego. You want to improve, and so you just keep beating yourself up verbally, silently, with that inner critic gone wild. And of course, all it does is make you feel bad and helpless and powerless. So I hung it up so I could laugh at myself when I went down that self-improvement path. Another way to put it, which perhaps is even clearer, is that if you feel that you need to lose weight for one reason or another, this egotistical way of self-improvement would be all day long tell yourself that you're fat, you're ugly, that you hate the way you look, you hate your body. And then that is somehow or another going to make you want to eat less. It will probably make you want to eat more for consolation because you're feeling so bad. So what we need to do is pay attention to what's going on, the messages we're sending ourselves, get to know it, make friends with it, and drop it and replace it with positive thoughts. And this is very different than not paying any attention to it. It's getting to know it and then work with it and realize that it's very biased, it's very opinionated, and it's not telling the truth. If we have a positive attitude when difficulties arise, we can work with a situation. We start seeing different ways of working with a situation, and well, it's a problem. It doesn't have to be overwhelmingly stressful and painful. But if we are going at this with an unhealthy self-image, we have a weak motivation to do anything. We might even feel there's nothing we can do about it because that's just the way we are, and you give up and you just suffer. So there's a difference between facing difficulties and suffering along with the difficulties. So positive outlook is really, really helpful when difficulties arise in our life. That these positive thoughts, positive reinforcements, they empower us, they make us feel like we have the ability to change, to transform. And this is not a lie, because we do have the ability to change and transform. That as a result, we have this potential to bear a lot of positive fruit in our lives. We can live our lives more fully. We can have more peace. We can have more contentment. We can be more focused. We can be more consistent. What came to my mind when he was talking about this, it reminded me the difference of the light that is emitted by a light bulb and that of a laser. Ordinary light radiates in all directions, and it comes in different wavelengths. You can have it go through a prism and you will get a spectrum. Laser light is just one wavelength. It's all the same color. It goes in one direction. It is not scattered. So ordinary light is non-directional and it's inconsistent, and it has a wide range of wavelengths. And laser light is very directed, one band, and very consistent. And so this is really a good, I think, example of the difference of these two ways of the being. The laser is like when you have this positive self-image, when you have these positive thoughts and you have the negative thoughts when they come, you let go of them. They don't leave a lot of imprints. You don't develop all these negative habits and ways of viewing things. And you're very consistent and focused and see things clearly. Whereas the other way is that you're scattered, you get involved in doing all kinds of things, and maybe you don't even finish a lot of things that you start. There's just no consistency. So that's my little scientific talk about laser light and the regular light bulb light. We don't want to have good thoughts because we should or we must. It is because with positive thoughts, life is better, life goes better, that it is self-empowering, it's transformative, it enriches our lives, and it leads to contentment. Positive thoughts allow us to recreate ourselves constantly, and we have control over who we become. Because of impermanence, our bodies are constantly changing, and so are our external circumstances and our internal circumstances. We want to, quote, recreate ourselves in such a manner that there is improvement and betterment in how we think about ourselves, the world, and other people has been changed, end quote. So this increases our happiness, it reduces suffering, it helps us enrich others, enrich ourselves, and also enrich the environment. The key to transformation is thoughts. It's good to observe our mind, see how thoughts affect our actions and our outcomes, to really understand the process, to see it clearly, and then see how by changing our thoughts, everything changes. Here is a very short quote that really sums this up. Quote, thoughts keep us imprisoned, but thoughts also have the capacity to free us, end quote. To continue now, he says that it's a misconception to think that we need to eliminate thoughts entirely and have a state of no thought, and that thoughts are the problem. The problem is holding on to them and purposely generating them. When we do shamatha meditation, we don't try to stop the thoughts. We don't try to change the thoughts. We just let go of the thoughts. So when we do shamatha, we're working with the thoughts rather than trying to escape from the thoughts or transform them. He has a quote from the Dhammapada. Quote, our actions follow thoughts like an imprint left behind by the revolving wheel of a chariot. It's important to keep this in mind and be mindful. Let go of the negative thoughts. Don't try to destroy them or get away from them, but just don't hang on to them, and do what you can to generate positive thoughts. Things like gratitude, appreciation, things about caring for other people, caring for yourself, and so forth. When we understand the power of thoughts, we can have a healthy perspective, a healthy outlook, healthy attitude, no matter what's going on around us. We can find a way to work with difficulties. He talks about eliminating struggles or egocentric. Positivity leads to solutions and makes things workable. And that, as he talked about in the previous 2 chapters, we need to integrate the mundane affairs that we're involved in with our spiritual activity. And it is positive thoughts that allows us to join these. And when we do that, there is fulfillment, happiness. We become better beings. We have a better mundane life and mundane activities. Instead of depression and despair, there is this underlying sense of beauty and goodness. That samsaric mind makes little things into big things, sees negative situations everywhere. You think that you are going to hell in a handbasket, or the world is going to hell in a handbasket. But with positive thoughts, you start realizing that in spite of all of that, there still is this underlying sense of beauty and sense of goodness. The last paragraph in the book begins this way, quote, therefore, paying attention to thoughts, language, and action helps us avoid being caught in the extremes of either coating every experience with negativity or creating an unreal love and light revelry. So if we can see this underlying fundamental goodness and beauty in everything, this allows us, you might say, a cushion, and helps us support ourselves in times of difficulty.